You are now tuned in to Mastering Mitzvahs. Mastering Mitzvahs. A podcast focused on creating the perfect bar and bat mitzvah celebration, offering tips, tricks, and trends to ensure an amazing event. Mastering Mitzvahs. From New Jersey's own Explosive Entertainment. Explosive Entertainment.
I know you're gonna dig this.
And here they are, your hosts, Dylan Weissman and Mike Langzer.
All right. This is episode 138, I believe. Mastering Mitzvah's last episode, 137. I think, Dylan, was my favorite episode that we recorded to date. I just had so much fun with our guest, Lily. She did such an amazing job of just reinforcing everything that we do. So for those of you who are listening consecutively, thanks for tuning in. That was one of my favorite episodes. And if you missed 137, definitely go back and check it out. There was a great story behind it.
Yeah, I really like when we get like the actual families that we work with or vendors in general to give not only a different perspective, but also kind of a soundboard that you know that, hey, listen, there's some credibility here. We've been trying to get one of my favorite families as of late, the Kotzker family, on because I want them to talk about something that I know that a lot of families are facing, which is dealing with little kids at an event. So I really, really want to get her and her family on there because she had a couple little chicken nugget kids, out
Chicken nuggets.
Yeah, I like calling them little chicken nuggets. That's fair, little chicken nuggets. There was this weekend. I called a bunch of little kids chicken nuggets, and then one of the big kids goes, "What am I a chicken nugget?" I said, "No, you're a chicken tender," and he laughed.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. That sort of flows a little bit into today's topic. I'm kind of for those of you who don't watch our podcast regularly, don't know us so well personally. I hate to say that we kind of wing these things, but we do. Like, we go into it like, what do you want to talk about today? And, we jot down a couple ideas. And the one that's stuck for today is, does guest count really matter? And this is a cool concept because several weeks ago we did a very small bat mitzvah, a total of 35 guests. I know in a few weeks we have one coming up that is teetering over the 300 count. So What does that mean? Does it matter in the success of event? And what are all the things that we need to look out for as guest counts change? I'm going to start with the statement that I think a great party can happen with 35 people or it could happen with 350 people, but the way you approach it has to be so incredibly different. So before we dive into, too deep, Dylan, what's your initial thought on this?
My initial thought is the obvious. The higher the guest count, the higher the cost is across the board. Now there is kind of like a tipping point in that. Like, once you get to a certain guest count, it's like almost it like drops per unit, right? There are aspects of it that drop per unit, but like buying power side of things. But my gut reaction is the higher the guest count, the more likely it is that you are going to be over your anticipated budget. So that's my gut reaction when I think, like, does guest count matter? And the thing that it matters the most towards is definitely the dollars that you are going to invest in your celebration.
That's a good point. And, maybe we need to dissect this further is, are we talking adults? Are we talking kids? Are we talking chicken nuggets here? Like, what's the variables with each of those age groups?
Right.
This whole chicken nugget thing is going to stick now.
I'm glad. I've been calling under 6-year-olds chicken nuggets for probably a decade now. I can't believe you haven't heard me say it.
No, I definitely haven't. But you have 2 of them at home, and please don't eat them.
I want to eat them so badly.
All right. So the first thing I jotted down a couple bullets for today's conversation. First thing that comes to mind is obviously finding the right venue for your guest count. You cannot overfill a venue, and you certainly don't want to be lost in space. So you need to probably pretty early in your planning have a vision. And I can remember my catering days where people booked a space and they said, we think we're going to be 150. And I said, oh, my venue's great for that. And then little by little it would snowball, or the kid would become more popular, go into camp or whatever it was. And next thing you know, they said, we have 250. And I said, well, you don't fit. well, at this point, you've already signed a contract, you already left a deposit. Like, we got to make it work, but it's so not ideal. So don't cram too many in, but you want to probably actually, Dylan, take the opposite. What happens when we have too few people in too large of a space?
I think that is more volatile. I think that's harder, is when you have a venue that's cavernous. You have too much space. And from the outsider's perspective, it's like, oh, yeah, I love the idea of having, the ability to spread out. But you're inviting these people, these invited guests, you want them to be as close to you as possible so that you don't get lost in the shuffle. There's a couple venues that I know of that are just cavernous by design. And I don't love working there because even when you have a 300-person guest count, it's just too spread out and you miss the cohesiveness. We've talked about it on this podcast before about, some of the best celebrations come with a level of togetherness. And I think that it's a lot more dangerous to book a venue that's too big than too small. I know that sounds crazy, but when you have a venue that's too spread out or too large, or you don't fill it out, it looks and feels worse. If you imagine, you work so hard to get your body in shape for the summertime, and then you wear an oversized t-shirt that, hides everything. It's kind of like that.
That makes good sense. It definitely makes good sense. Next thing I wrote down is, like staffing quantity, you said this weekend that you were in a huge space and you wish you had some more staff to help corral the guests, the kids especially, and almost to act as security in some sake, because you were in a venue that had a lot of exits. So guest count matters, but the variable there is how many of our attendants are there to watch the guests.
Yeah, well, I mean, keep it as simple as this. Like, how many places can they go to the bathroom? How many places can they go get a drink? If you have 200 adults, you better have like 6 bartenders at a minimum. Otherwise, you're going to have like a line, and you don't want like a concession stand style line waiting for the things that you pay all this great money for, like your bar or your food or some cases. Another thing that really comes to mind is security at exits. You would never, I've said it on this podcast and I've said it to almost every family I've worked with, you would never put a teacher of middle school aged kids in a room of 75 middle school aged kids and expect only one teacher to handle all of them effectively. There's going to be kids who get lost in the sauce, and that's not ideal. You don't want that. They're your invited guests. You want them to be treated as such. So when they're overwhelming in numbers, it becomes very challenging. I think it's a lot more dangerous, both from a safety perspective and from a entertainment perspective, that if you don't have a large enough staff size, it can be bad. I think I've said it. I think our metric is kind of right. For every 25 kids, you should have an entertainment staff and a security staff in some capacity. Thoughts?
I agree with that. I think the statement you said before on it depends on the venue and number of exits, I think that is really viable also. But yeah, I mean, definitely one dancer per every 25 seems to be like our standard.
And do you agree with the MC does not count towards that 25? The MC has so many other responsibilities that, like, 25 guests does not include an MC. It's one motivator from the dancer perspective. I also believe that you should have at a minimum one security style person who's not a part of the dance staff, who's not a part of the catering staff, who's not a part of the venue staff, the security person on every available exit.
Yeah.
It's just too challenging for you to expect your caterer to not only be your caterer and your party planner and your server and your timeline host, and then also be security. You just can't.
It keeps your teen guests in the space, and it also keeps the public out. Like some of these venues, have access to public spaces, and it's too easy for people to come in or out. So, we really haven't spoken much about security at all in this podcast. Maybe that's a whole other episode. But definitely something viable. The party I did this past Saturday night had 2 hired bar mitzvah bouncers, which is there's a whole industry companies out there now. Yeah, there's a few companies out there doing it now, and you know what, their job is to keep the kids in the space so that the dancers don't have to be bouncers and the dancers can actually be motivators, which is what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, from a performance standpoint, it's really a hard line to draw. I'm often put in a really tough spot when there's not enough security personnel, where I then have to be the bad guy, the police officer, and that's not the role of an MC or an entertainment company. Like we don't we train our staff to be safe first and foremost, and if the safety is compromised, we can't do what we need to do.
Speaking of safety, your guard dog over there is going nuts. You must have somebody crashing your bar mitzvah right now. So aside from the number of staff, something else I want to hit is how guest count affects some of the other items. Like, should we bring in more stages? Is one photo booth enough? When you're talking about auxiliary services, beauty bars and photo booths and swag stations, like the number of attendants goes up in quantity as you raise the number of guests. I think that's super, super important. So, I mean, to talk about that, if we could say photo booths as an example, a singular photo booth is probably ideal for upwards to 200, 250 guests. Once you extend past that, I think a second photo booth is very valuable. Now, the photo booths don't need to be identical. Like, that's one of the things that I think is really neat, is that we offer multiple photo activations. So in theory, you have a stationary photo booth and then you have a roaming photo station that will help you manage the guest photo experience with a 250, 300 plus person party, but not spend money duplicating the same photo booth. What other services do you think of, Dylan, that change based on your guest count?
Well, I think photographers in general, photographers and videographers, the minute you have a larger guest count, you want better coverage. So having multiple photographers, now you talk about having a second or a third shoot. Did you say this already as I was dealing with this crazy dog situation?
I just saw it now.
So we're talking on the back end of things. I'm trying to keep the continuity of this thing going. All right, so we said that. Other services, we talked about bartenders, we talked about security, we talked about how about game attendance in general? All the different stations you have, even a standard Pop-A-Shot or foosball, the minute you have 200 kids in that one space, it becomes challenging if you only have one person to do it.
Yeah. And, going back to staging too, like big parties should have lots of stages. It should have a big dance floor. So guest count matters in all of these things.
I said it earlier in passing. How about bathrooms? How many available bathrooms are there? And of that, how many of them have multiple stalls or multiple urinals? Like, that matters. It really, really does. I think about like DIY style places, or like if you're doing it in your backyard, trying to pull this together. Like, what are you going to do when you have 100 guests and you have one toilet? That becomes a challenge to the flow of the event.
Yeah.
How about parking spots? Valet people, valet personnel. If you're going to have 100 cars and only 2 valet people, you will have people at the end of the night and the beginning of the night struggling to get in and out of your space if your guest count is too large.
Absolutely.
So I think my takeaway from that is, what you need to ask the professional, hey, I'm anticipating between this and that. This is my range. What do you think I need to make sure that this is comfortable and we're confident that everyone's going to be handled well?
Yeah.
And take your word for it.
Dylan, I'm going to shift the conversation just a tad. I think one of the things that sparked this conversation is guest count changes. And what I mean by that is, you book a party, you have an idea, and I think I've used the scenario earlier of 150 people. You book a party based on the expectation you're going to have 150. And then as you get closer and closer and closer, you realize, oh my God, I'm going to have 250 people at this party. What needs to shift in regards to that when it comes to entertainment and all of the other elements that tie the mitzvah together?
My mind is racing. Ask the question differently, because I think I know the answer that I want to give, but I'm afraid that this actually answers a different question we have on our slate here.
Okay, so let's role play for a second. I'm a mitzvah dad. I booked Explosive Entertainment. I've got 150 people on my contract. And then it's a month before the party, and you called me and I said, oh, by the way, we're up to 250. Does that affect anything? What response do you give me?
I would say, hey guys, you hired us to do a really, really great job, and we advised you on a package that would be really good at 150 guests. One of the first questions we ask is what your anticipated guest count is. If you're going to be double that, we need to consider a different package, both from a production standpoint, a staffing standpoint, a prop and prize standpoint, giveaway standpoint. All of those items matter in the guest count process. And we're not just throwing out from a vendor perspective, we're not just throwing out an arbitrary number. We have a recipe in our mindset of how we can effectively pull off your vision here. And at this point, we would know your vision. So if I get a hold of a family and we're in the final month of their planning process and they come back to me and say, hey, my kid went away to sleepaway camp in the amount of time, that we've been working together, and he ended up making 50 more friends and they're all coming. What should we do? That's something you have to be transparent about, because we shouldn't walk in. No vendor should walk into an event and be blindsided by double the amount of anticipated guest count that they're working with. It is to your disadvantage if that happens.
So let's go down the list. We would definitely want to analyze, do we have the right number of dancers? Because that ratio of one dancer for every 25 vastly just changed. Do we have the big enough sound system? Like, while that's never something we discuss with clients, we know in advance if we're walking into a small room with a 75-person party, we're taking, speaker system number 1. But if we have 300 people in a huge ballroom, we're taking speaker system number 2. And we need to know that so we're not blindsided. Good term, blindsided, that you use.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we a lot of people don't think about that. Like, the equipment that we're sending is built for your celebration. At least all the reputable companies that I know of are planning this out in advance. Like, we handle all of the production ahead of time, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. I'm starting to think about, all right, well, the guest count, should I bring this style of lighting because of how big the space is and how many people we're covering? Or should I bring this style of lighting that has a similar effect, but it's better for a small throw space?
Mm-hmm.
All of that matters. So I think the honesty, you're not gonna do yourself any good by keeping that to yourself. You need to explain to the people you're working with what they're walking into.
I know we even take in consideration the size of our TVs. Like we offer different size TVs, but sometimes clients just say, I want a set of TVs. And we then analyze our events, which room is biggest and which guest count is the largest. If we have multiple size TVs available in the warehouse, we're going to send the bigger ones out to the bigger events. It's for viewing purpose. If you're in this huge room that's 150 feet deep, the people in the way back are not going to be able to see a 50-inch set of TVs.
How about the idea of, oh my goodness, my guest count doubled. Maybe I need more TVs than we currently have, because the viewing angles for what was originally, a 3/4 dance floor view is now actually almost in a round. Now we need to set up satellite TVs somewhere else or satellite speakers somewhere else. Every time you add people to your guest count, expect there to be some modifications in some capacity towards some of your items here. And that does come with a cost. So please understand, it's really to the benefit of the celebration. And we're not just trying to pull $1 over just to make $1. It's just not the case. Yeah. It's for the success of the event.
Dylan, I have one last topic here that I want to hit on. And it's not a cost item, and it's not a production item, and it's not specific to DJs or photographers. But if a client said to me, what happens if my guest count significantly increased or decreased? I think that a client needs to think about how much time they're going to have with each guest. And, we spend many, many podcasts talking, should a party be 4 hours or 5 hours? I think that some of that even comes down to what's your guest count. Are you trying to socialize with just 35 kids, or are you trying to socialize with 300 people? And by socializing, the role of a host and hostess is to be cordial with all of your guests. It sounds so silly and obvious, but it's true. Like, you have to make your way around and talk to all of the people at some point. You try to get a lot of that done during the cocktail hour so you could spend the rest of the party dancing. But, if you have 60 minutes in cocktail and you have 300 guests, well, you do the math there. It's not a lot of time per person, especially when your photographer's pulling you for family portraits or this or that, or you have to get changed from one outfit to another. Evaluate how your guest count impacts your time at the celebration. I think that is so vital.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really excellent point that has no cost-effective parts to it. It's just a function of how much are you going to enjoy your celebration? Are you going to be stressed out because you didn't get to say hi to, the one person from work that you invited because you thought you had to? It really is important to understand that you're going to want to see the guests that you invited there. They are your invited guests for one reason or another. And you don't want to be pulled in too many different directions. They should be coming to you and celebrating with you. And I also think that when you get to a much larger guest count, you lose a little bit of that cohesiveness because there are now so many different pockets of people that are there. What happens to the mentality of your guest of honor?
Well, you lose the intimacy of it. The guest of honor is probably not going to speak with all of the adult guests. Even though the bar mitzvah is for little Johnny is not going to speak to dad's coworkers when
Right.
dad's coworkers are invited and they're the 299th and 300th guest on that list.
Right.
But will little Johnny talk to the coworkers if they're the 18th and 19th invited adults? Probably, yeah. I think it's an interesting science to look at.
Mike, what's your favorite ratio for adult versus kid at an event? Let's say that it's a standard ballroom that would typically hold anywhere from comfortably 150 and with a non-seated cocktail hour style 300. So typical style ballroom.
Well, I'm going to say I don't have a favorite ratio, but what I see most often is 2-to-1, like 2-to-1 adults versus kids. So if there were 100 adults, there's 50 kids. If there's 200 adults, there's 100 kids. And that seems to happen a little bit more when we have twins or siblings, when you get into that 100 kid guest count. So I think that's a pretty common number. But now you asked me what's my favorite. I think the family has to analyze. Like if they're doing a kids party, hence the old school term, like a sock hop, you could have 80 kids and 10 adults and have a stellar kid party. And
well, that's where I was going with this.
Yeah, you're going to forget about a lot of the stuff that comes with the formality of having a traditional 2-to-1 ratio.
It changes a lot. It changes a lot because when you have an even split, you're going to lean more towards an adult style celebration by happenstance. When you have a 2-to-1, which is what I see most often, adult to kid, you're going to, by a lot of stretches, lean towards a party for the adult guests. And when I hear the phrase, we really want you to focus on the kids, don't worry about the adults. Well, then why are there so few kids in comparison to the adults? And now I'm facing this issue where it's like, I want to be wild and crazy with the kids, but I have 4 tables of grandparents and their friends there for some reason or another that now I'm affecting their time. So I think that your guest count and then the ratio of your guest count affects the overall product.
Yeah. I think this is a fun episode. I think there's a lot that can, be spoken about with this. One tiny little sidebar just kind of popped in my mind. I was making a montage the other day for a client and they had, I think it was 250 pictures, which is more than double what we suggest. And when I was looking at, they literally missed the whole group of camp friends. There were school friends and soccer friends, but there's no folder called camp friends. And I inquired, and you know what they said? They said, fortunately and unfortunately, the camp friends can't make it. There was another mitzvah going on where a lot of the camp friends had decided they were going to go to that other party. It saved the family some money by not having this extra influx of kids. But it even mattered in the case of the montage. The family had such a hard time narrowing down pictures that if there were these other 30 or 40 camp friends, they would have probably had to find another 20 or 30 pictures to accommodate that. So there really is a lot of factors that go into what the end guest count is. And you don't think about it at first, but it is super valuable. And I think, we try to leave tips and suggestions on all of our podcasts. I think you have to set a threshold in your mind. The whole idea of having an A list and a B list and a C list. I think if anybody's on that C list, it's unnecessary. Even a B list is probably unnecessary. Put a guest count in your mind, find the right venue that accommodates that, and stick to it. Like, don't let outside forces change it too much.
My favorite tip that we've given is you should ask the question, what happens if my anticipated guest count of 150 turns into 75 or 300? What happens? Because I don't want to be put in a situation where I'm going to be in a room that's really cavernous or in a room where I can't move. I want to make sure that my son or daughter, as they go into middle school, can develop new friendships and I don't have to say no to having them come. This was years and years and years ago, but I remember my mom was very deliberate in saving about 10 to 15 kid spots for all the new friends I was making in middle school, knowing that my bar mitzvah invites were really already set because I had my bar mitzvah in the fall. So I think you need to ask that question. It's my favorite tip of today is ask all of your vendors what happens if my guest count gets cut in half or if my guest count doubles in size. What do we need to expect from you and your services, and how would that change maybe my pricing, packaging, or expectations?
Love it. So let's say adios to episode 138. This was another fun one. We'll be back in a week or two with another episode of Mastering Mitzvahs. As always, like us, follow us, share us. Hit us up if you have any topics you want to chat about, and we'll see you soon.
See ya.